Hungarian folk tales. Little Diogenes. When I was a little lad, my father sent me out to the forest to watch the cows grazing. He told me to keep a close eye on the herd because if any of the cows strayed away, he'd skin me alive. I tried to watch them as best I could, but I found a blackberry bush by the edge of the forest with ripe berries on it that were big and fat and black. Well, like I said, I was only a lad, and I instantly forgot what my father had said and set to work eating as many berries as I could manage. And while I stood feeding my face, the two cows strayed away from the grass meadow and began to make a meal of valuable hay. And just as that was happening, the devil sent the local constable, who cracked his whip and drove those two stray cows away from the hay they shouldn't have eaten. I gave chase as best I could and appealed to the menacing man. "Constable, please, they're my father's cows. Let them go with me." But the man took no notice at all and saddled his horse and rode away. He set out for the town and I followed him as best I could on foot, but he was soon far out of sight. So what was I to do? I couldn't stand before my father without his precious cows. I thought it best to run away instead and drown my sorrows as best I could. So I sat on a pile of pebbles by the side of the road and wept and wailed, for I was still only a lad and I'd had to leave home. Soon a woman passed and she said, "Why are you weeping, young lad? What on earth occurred?" So I told her of my troubles and that I did not dare to return home or else my father would surely skin me alive. My parents would never see me again and I would be orphaned and homeless. "Don't be so foolish, young lad," said the woman. "A parent's punishment strengthens the soul, but a blow from a stranger only bruises a boy's body. Now take yourself home before it gets dark." "I will not," I told her boldly. When the woman saw that she spoke to me in vain, she washed my filthy face, then she took me by the hand and led me to a large stone house. When we reached the kitchen, she placed a plate of steaming porridge before me, but my belly was so filled with berries that I couldn't swallow as much as a spoonful. But I didn't dare leave it because I thought she'd think me ungrateful. So I took the porridge and spooned it under my shirt. Then after I'd fed my shirt this fine supper, I lay down by the stove to warm myself. And as I lay in the snug, my sadness slowly slipped away, and I was happy to have found comfort in the kitchen of this motherly woman. But it wasn't long before her husband returned, who was not what I'd call a fatherly man. As he caught sight of me lying on the blanket, he complained to his wife, "Why have you brought another hungry mouth to the house? But he's nothing more than a lost lad. I thought he could help about the farm." "Help? With what? A skinny thing like him will eat us out of house and home. Hey you, get up and lift up this sack of corn. I want to see if you're strong enough to be of service here." I tried to lift the heavy sack, but my 8 years proved not enough to lift the heavy weight. But I was soon undone when my belt burst open, my shirt shot out of my trousers, and a pool of porridge landed on the floor. "You filthy thief! You have stolen from us on your very first day here." And he took out a whip to give me a thrashing. The wife begged him to spare me, but instead he grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and stuffed me into a barrel. Then he sealed the barrel tight and rolled it far from the house so that no one passing would hear my cries. And there you'll stay, you filthy thief, and tomorrow I'll have you locked in jail, he snarled. I was now stuck tight inside the barrel and could do nothing more than groan and moan. But then in my hour of greatest need, I remembered a lesson we'd had at school about a wise old man by the name of Diogenes, who used to live in a barrel much as this. Then I thought of a plan. I had a knife in my pocket and I could wedge it in between the staves, but the barrel was made of old oak and the wood was so hard that my knife broke. Then I sighted a fox that alighted in the garden. The chicken shed was closed and so the fox began to nose around my barrel. The fox appeared at the very best time as I had an idea that made me feel as wise as old Diogenes. And I started to make a noise like a laying hen. Cluck, 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 cluck. What a good place to sit. Instead of eggs, I'm sitting atop a pile of sweet honeycomb. Oh, my dear little hen, would you give your friend the fox a taste of that sweet honey you have? Of course, my foxy friend. Simply stick your tail in and I shall smear it with sweet honey that you can lick off later. The foolish fox did just as I suggested and popped its tail in through the hole that I grabbed and held onto with all my might. The hen thief thought it was caught for good and began to leap about the place. And it leapt and jumped, jumped and leapt until the barrel had broken apart. Free at last, I ran and ran until I found home. My parents were happy that I had returned. My father gave me a harsh beating for my sins and not watching over his valuable cows. But my mother rubbed my back with soothing cream and I continued to grow in my loving home. Hungarian folk tales. The Hedgehog. Once upon a time, there lived a merchant, a king, and a poor man. The merchant often went hunting in the forest, and one day he became so very lost that he wandered around for 3 whole days, unable to find his way home. He said, "Oh, if only someone would show me the way out, I'd give him the hand of the most beautiful of my 3 daughters in marriage and 3 sacks of gold. I'll show you the way out if you follow me." The merchant looked down at his feet and saw a snuffling hedgehog. Then the merchant was forced to promise the hedgehog his most beautiful daughter's hand and 3 sacks of gold if he will lead him out of the forest. Then the hedgehog set out, followed by the merchant, and they reached the edge of the forest in no time. The following day, the king also went hunting in the forest, and he also got lost, much like the merchant the day before. The king said, "If only someone would show me the way out, I'd give him the hand of the most beautiful of my 3 daughters in marriage, along with 3 carts of gold." "I'll show you the way out if you follow me." The king looked around to see where the voice was coming from and then saw the hedgehog by his feet. He was so anxious to get out of the forest that he couldn't care less who it was, so he followed the hedgehog and they soon reached the edge of the forest. The following day, the poor man also got lost in the forest. "Oh dear, I have nothing to my name, but even if an ugly beast showed me the way out of this forest, I would willingly adopt it as my own dear child." "I'll show you the way out if you follow me," a voice said. The voice, of course, came from the hedgehog, and it led the poor man to the edge of the forest in no time at all. Time passed, and the merchant, the king, and the poor man had almost forgotten about the little hedgehog. One night, after the poor man had gone to bed, someone knocked on his window. "Father dear, please open the door for me." Who can that be, the poor man wondered, because he knew he had no children. "Hello, Father. I finally come home," the hedgehog said. "Welcome, son. I'm happy you're here," said the poor man. "I am too. And would you please wake my dear mother to make my bed for me?" "Father dear, do you have 2 pennies?" the hedgehog asked. "Yes, I do, my son," said the poor man. "Well then, please go into town, and in the marketplace you'll find a very old lady selling a black cockerel." "Buy it for me," said the hedgehog. "Then go to the saddler, who has a worn-out saddle, and buy that for me too." So the poor man went into town, bought the black cockerel and the worn-out saddle, and took them home, where the hedgehog saddled the cockerel, climbed up onto its back, and rode away as fast as the wind. The hedgehog didn't stop until it reached the home of the merchant, where it said, "Merchant, sir, open the door and let me in." The merchant nearly fell over backwards when he saw the hedgehog, but he had to let it in. Then he called his 3 daughters and told them of the promise he had made to the prickly creature. The merchant's daughters cried and cried, but the hedgehog paid no attention and chose the most beautiful girl and tried to comfort her with the following words: "You are mine, and I am yours, till death do us part." But the pretty girl refused to repeat his words and cried so much that she threw herself down on the ground. But protest as she might, the girl was forced to leave home with the hedgehog. Then the merchant harnessed the horses, put 3 sacks of money into another cart, and off they went with the hedgehog proudly riding its black cockerel alongside. "Are you still crying? I am, and I will cry until my dying day." "In that case," said the hedgehog, "go back to your father." But the hedgehog kept the 3 sacks of gold and took them home to the poor man. Time passed until the day eventually came when the hedgehog saddled its black cockerel and rode off to visit the king of the land. The hedgehog told the king why it had come, hoping the king remembered his promise. "I only wish I had forgotten, but I haven't, and I always keep my word," said the king. He called his 3 daughters and sadly told them what had happened to him in the forest, and now this prickly creature had come here to pick his most beautiful daughter for his wife. "It may think I'm the most beautiful, but I refuse to be a hedgehog's wife. I'd rather die than be a hedgehog's wife. I'll be only too happy to be its wife because it was so kind to my dear father." The king was happy and sad at the same time. He was glad one of his daughters had turned out to be so kind-hearted, but was sad to lose his only kind-hearted daughter. The king loaded silver, gold and diamonds onto 3 carts, harnessed horses to the royal coach, and the princess climbed in. The hedgehog, however, did not go in the coach, but rode alongside on the black cockerel. They had been riding for many hours and were far away from the palace when the hedgehog looked into the coach and was surprised to see the princess happy and not crying. She said, "Why do you insist on riding that black cockerel instead of sitting beside me here in the coach?" "Aren't you afraid of me?" the hedgehog asked. "Why should I, when I know you will do me no harm?" she replied. "Don't you find me ugly?" asked the hedgehog. "Of course not," the princess replied. Then a miracle happened. The hedgehog shook itself and immediately turned into a tall and handsome prince who beamed brighter than the sun. Then the cockerel shook itself and turned into a fabulous stallion. And a palace appeared with walls and windows made of sparkling diamonds. Then they sent for the king, they sent for the poor man, and they sent for everyone in the land to join them at their wonderful wedding feast. And they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian folk tales. The gold coin and the hat. I want to tell you the story of 3 young men and a hat. The 3 young men were all big-bearded fellows, and one day they decided that the time had come to go out and seek their fortunes in the great wide world. They walked and walked until they came to a little village, and as they neared the village, they met an old man. And one of the young men said, "How many days are there in the world, old man?" "One less with today, young man," the old man replied. "And are there any good men left in the world?" "Roses still bloom even when they're surrounded by weeds." "Now that was clever," the young man said. "I'll ask you one more question. What does an old man have under his hat? Come to the inn, young men, and I'll tell you there." The young men were penniless, but they still went with the old man. But the old man was the first to enter, and he told the innkeeper to keep pouring them wine until they had 5 florins worth. So all 4 men took a seat at the table, and the innkeeper poured wine, and they drank it and had a very jolly time indeed. But when they had drunk 5 florins worth, the innkeeper stopped serving them and politely asked, "Now, gentlemen, who will pay for all this fine wine?" The young men would have willingly paid, but they were penniless. "So then the hat will pay," the old man said. And he took off his hat, shook it, and a gold coin fell out. The young men were very surprised by this sight and keen to get their hands on the old man's valuable hat. Then all they would have to do was to shake it, and the ground would be covered in gold coins. They pleaded and appealed to the old man to sell them his hat and to name his price. "Very well," the old man said. "You can see that I am indeed an old man, and so 500 florins would be enough for the few years I have left. So that is my price for the hat, young sirs." The young gentlemen all ran to the count and asked to borrow 500 florins, and the count was happy to comply. So they paid the old man the price for the hat, and he went home. Then the hearty young fellows continued to eat and drink and make merry until a very late hour that night. And when the time came to pay, they shook the old man's hat, but nothing fell out, not even a single gold coin. What were the poor fools to do? They could not pay, and so the innkeeper made them all stay and work to pay for the wine they had drunk that night. The moment the innkeeper let them go, they hurried to find the old man who had sold them the hat. "Let's go and look for him in the village, and we'll teach that old man a lesson for cheating us so." The old man got wind of their arrival and tried to hide all over the house, but his wife still found him wherever he hid. Then his wife said to him at last, "You silly old fool, don't try and hide. It's much better if you pretend to be dead. Lie on the bench and I shall put a sheet over you, and when the young men come, I shall tell them that you're dead, and they will not be able to do a thing with a dead man." So that's exactly what they did, and the wife began to weep for her dead husband. "Oh, my dearest darling husband, why did you die and leave me here all alone?" When the young men appeared, they asked the wife why she was crying so. "What happened? Why are you crying, old lady?" "How could I not cry, my dears? My husband is lying dead on the bench and I am left here to fend for myself alone. But do not mourn his loss, for he was a terrible rogue." But then one of the young men sighted a stick in the corner of the room and he could not resist giving the old man's body a prod. "Take that, you scoundrel, for the money you stole from us." Then the old man leapt up and put his hands together in thanks. "Oh, God bless you, gentlemen. Behold, now I believe in the miraculous power of the stick. Listen here. I was walking in the fields one day when I saw a dead dog lying there. I prodded the dead dog with this selfsame stick and it jumped up and ran away. But now I know better than ever that this stick has the power to perform miracles. Wife, give these young men all we possess and we will keep only this stick. Then, when a rich man dies, I will raise him back from the dead and be richly rewarded for my miraculous deed." "Not so fast," the young men said. "We don't want your possessions, we want your miraculous stick." The old man was not willing to hand it over at first, but then he agreed. "You made fools of us once before, but never again. God bless you, old man." Then the old man laughed and gave them the stick. The young men were walking back through the village when they passed the house of the Count. There they saw a hearse and 6 horses about to set off in a funeral procession. So the young gentleman asked who was about to be buried. The people told them, "Why, the young countess, of course. There you can see her mother, father, and handsome bridegroom standing behind the coffin." The young men did not waste a minute and ran up to the old countess. They demanded that she open the coffin that instant so they might raise the young countess from the dead. Then the old countess did as the young men said and promised them all the treasure she had if only they could bring her daughter back from the dead. So one of the young men approached the coffin and tapped the young countess lightly on the throat with the miraculous stick. She looked dead 1 minute and was alive the next. Everyone was delighted and now they would have a wedding instead of a wake. And they all ate and drank and had a very good time. The young men received a cart full of gold for their troubles and were so happy that they even gave the old man a sack of gold when they passed his house again. Strange as it may sound, they never tried their luck with the stick a second time because they still thought that the old man might have tricked them after all. So they all went back to school to complete their studies. So that is how this story ends. If you liked it, tell it to your friends.